An essay that appeared in the New York Times on Sunday morning detailing how Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh was involved in yet another allegation of sexual assault was an embarrassment not only to the New York Times, but to the Democratic Party. At least 8 Democratic candidates for president rushed to the microphones or to TV shows on Sunday morning calling for the impeachment of Kavanaugh.
I think that he has disqualified himself for service on the Supreme Court.
What's the remedy for that?
He should step down or he should be impeached.
What's become clear is that he should be impeached. The House absolutely has the ability to impeach him.
They probably should have waited a day. Same can be said of Massachusetts Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, who you probably know best as the Ringo Starr from a group of freshman congresswomen dubbed the Squad. She immediately said that she is going to introduce a resolution calling for an impeachment inquiry of Justice Kavanaugh. And I can tell you right now, that resolution is going nowhere because even top Democrats are against it. They are warning the Congresswoman that introducing such a resolution will only hurt their chances in 2020 because the 2 New York Times reporters who wrote the essay, which were excerpts from a book they wrote, complained that the New York Times editors took out exculpatory details. Details like several friends of the alleged victim who were supposedly there don't remember the incident at all. And the alleged victim wouldn't be interviewed. Why?
My sense is, from those who know her, is that she doesn't remember it. And I mean, let's remember that this was a drunken party, and it's conceivable that people don't always remember what happens in a situation like that.
Oh, and by the way, did we mention this all allegedly happened at a party at Yale University over 35 years ago? A spokesperson for the New York Times claims, "We didn't mean to mislead the public." Really? Because it sure does seem like you did. There is simply not a news organization in the world that would allow a story, especially one that is potentially slanderous, to go to print or to air and take out the fact that the victim didn't want to be interviewed for the story, or the fact that people who were there don't remember the incident at all. So why did they do it? Well, earlier this year, Jill Abramson, the former executive editor of the New York Times, wrote a book called Merchants of Truth, where she claims that the New York Times has become unmistakably anti-Trump. And she says that's because young liberal staff members claim that urgent times call for urgent measures, and the dangers of a Trump presidency obviate the old standards. Those old standards must be the very tenets of journalism. As for President Trump, well, the New York Times has always been one of his favorite topics, and this Kavanaugh debacle was just too good for him to pass on.
I call for the resignation of everybody at the New York Times involved in the Kavanaugh smear story.
That's actually good advice, and maybe the only way to stop the bleeding after a story that hurt both the reputation of the New York Times and journalism. The backdrop of all of this is, of course, the fact that the Democrats desperately never wanted Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court in the first place. Not because they didn't like him or he wasn't qualified, but because they thought it would make the court too conservative. This is all politics of the dirtiest kind. The kind where you destroy a person simply because that person doesn't agree with you. You'll remember the Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee tried everything to stop the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court until they finally leaked the name of an alleged sexual assault victim that did not want to be identified. That compelled Christine Blasey Ford to testify before the committee. And even though she knew few details about a party that happened over 40 years ago, she did say that Brett Kavanaugh attempted to rape her. It is a story that could not be substantiated by a good friend of Blasey Ford, who was allegedly there at the time. But Christine Blasey Ford was just a pawn in a much bigger game. To keep Brett Kavanaugh off the court. And that game continues to this very day with a much less credible story. The only good news for Kavanaugh in this whole thing is that this is such a disaster for the New York Times and those Democrats who rushed to call for impeachment that most likely they've given him immunity for any similar attacks. I'm Larry Mendte. We'll talk again soon.